Okay, my name is Greg Morgenson. I'm with North Dakota State University. I'm the woody plant specialist in the Woody Plant Improvement Program, one of the few woody plant programs that is left in the country. And we actually do a lot of trialing, testing, release of plant materials for the upper Midwest, actually countrywide, but essentially adapted best to the upper Midwest, Intermountain area, those areas that are similar to our climate. And I've been with the program going on 8 years. Before that, 29 years in nurseries. Before that, several years University of Nebraska in woody plant selection improvement. So I have a little bit of a background in it. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about our program and then just get into kind of a diversity of plant materials. Of course, both things we've released from the program and materials that some other programs that maybe have done well, looked well in our area. Our woody plant program has been around for quite a while, since '71. If you guys have heard of Dr. Herman, Dr. Dale Herman, he initiated the program in '71. He retired in 2010, and Dr. Todd West took over as the Woody Project leader at that time, and we've just continued with the program in trial and release of plant materials. There's a lot of need for diversity in our areas. Of course, everybody's familiar with our loss of tree species, but we also need diversity. We've got quite a stressful climate, as you guys have in your area. They need to be stress tolerant, adaptable, winter hardy, pest resistant, plants for use in northern U.S. and prairie Canada. More and more, a lot of our materials actually go across the border into the Canadian prairie provinces, which like our program a lot and use our plant materials also. Many of the commercially available cultivars are not really suitable for our climate, zones 3 and 4. We have low annual precipitation, very low in the central plains here, anywhere from about 12 to 24 inches. So we're lacking on moisture, high soil pH levels throughout the region. I'll mention that a little bit later here. As I mentioned before, the diseases and insects, we've lost a lot of tree genera, notably ash now ongoing, elm, spruce. We have a lot of spruce problems, pine, especially pine wilt nematode with Scotch pine and other introduced hard pines in the eastern part of the plains. So we're losing a lot of materials, a lot of species, a lot of cultivars. So we need to work at widening that palette of materials that we have. And we do trial of additional genera that are not presently or very little used for potential zone 4 with warming temperatures. As our climate has warmed, we have found we're now able to grow a number of species that were borderline or did not grow for us previously. And then another thing that I'm really looking at and maybe applicable to your area as well of ours is rootstock usage for white oak group species to diversify oak usage. White oak group species, I'm meaning swamp white oak, white oak, those species that have a very hard time responding to our high pH levels. A little bit about native plant density, and certainly this is applicable to the eastern Colorado area. The big thing to get from this chart is if you look at the brown and dark brown, that's much less density of woody plant materials in these areas. So the whole central plains from Canadian provinces down through Texas is very limited in woody plant density. That extends into that eastern areas of Montana, Wyoming, Colorado. So we're really needing more plant diversity and species for those areas, and that's what we work on. A lot of our work is done at our horticulture farm at Absaraka, North Dakota. That's about 35 miles northwest of Fargo, where I work out of during the week. And we have a 60-acre research and trial farm in that area. So it's kind of a little gem in the midst of corn, sugar beet, and potato fields. And then you have this magnificent arboretum in that setting. So it's fun to work out there. Our Arboretum Collection, we do a collection which is alphabetically by genera. So on our right-hand side, it starts with the A's, Acer, Aesculus, Ulmus, continues south, clear down to the end, makes a horseshoe turn in about the M and P's area, heads back north, ends up in the U's on the end in the ulmus. So it includes a lot of genera in that area. As the Arboretum has grown, those genera tend to migrate into each other in the middle, obviously, so makes kind of an interesting collection. But we've trialed thousands of species and cultivars of woody plants out here. Many come and go, a lot of them stay, so there's a lot of information we've gleaned over the years. We also have peripheral plantings around the Arboretum. This is one we call our industry block or nursery block, and we cooperate with a lot of the major and smaller nurseries from around the country to trial their plant material in our Zone 3B 4A climate. They tend to send materials they kind of feel we're at the end of the world for some reason. And we can really give them a cold hardiness testing and a high soil pH testing on our grounds out here. So it's very useful to them to see how their plant material performs in climates other than the ideal climate of the Midwest and Eastern US. There's also a lot of other projects of other researchers, a lot of work on Juneberry selection and improvement, hops, small fruits, grape production. This is similar to a lot of universities in the Midwest as they kind of try to broaden the agricultural background that growers can utilize. Soil pH, I wanted to put this in here. Actually, it goes up to 7.7. I would die for a pH of 7.7. That would just be like heaven to me. You can see on this map, the black, of which Colorado is included. We're on the high end of those pH zones. And I really can't believe South Dakota and Nebraska, especially Western Nebraska, are really any better than we are. So I kind of feel that those lighter colors are a little bit of a misnomer. Our pH ranges generally from the very high 7s up to around 8.4 across the state. So we have high pH levels. Some of those soils are sodium affected also, which really makes a difference on plant materials. In towns, you guys are all familiar with soil pH-induced chlorosis. Some species are very, very susceptible. Everybody in the U.S. wants to grow their Freeman maples. And in our area, they all turn brilliant yellow, which is real attractive as you drive down the streets with all these bright yellow trees. But other genera and species are very tolerant. In the foreground, on the picture on your left, is philodendron. It doesn't mind it at all, and you can see behind and in the upper right picture, elms tend to love pHs in the 8s. In fact, it doesn't even slow them down. We'd like to slow down elms somehow, and soil pH obviously is not one of the ways to do that. We get chlorosis in a number of species. Of course, a lot of the maples, the reds and Freemans, and why people try to grow them, I'm just not even sure. White pine in the center. If you've ever seen a chlorotic white pine, it's a pretty sick-looking tree. Number of the oak species, especially swamp white oak and white oak, gradually succumb to high pH and die on our soils. Real cheery scenario I'm painting here. Another one that's really interesting, the driest states in the continental U.S. If you look down there on the left, Colorado's at number 7, North Dakota's at number 8, South Dakota's in there at number 10. In the winter, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, we're the driest states in the continental U.S., and it's hard to believe that when you've got 60, 80 inches of snow and you've got a blizzard outside with another 15 inches, but actually out of that snow, we don't get as much water as you think we would. But summertime, overall, we kind of drop out of that. Colorado remains in about number 9 in the driest states, but we do get rain in the summertime. And our precipitation ranges from about 24 inches in the Fargo area on the east side to around 12 inches at Beach, North Dakota on the west side. So it's a pretty diverse precipitation regime that we have across the state. So where do we get the plant materials that we trial? We do a lot of work by seed. We grow out seedling populations, some of which have nothing special in them, and occasionally find some very special individuals. We do some traditional plant breeding, observe traits, mostly F1s, moving into F2 or second generation hybrids as we move along here. And what I do a lot is selection by landscape observation. the Great Plains have pretty much all been planted by trees brought in from somewhere. So we have this huge reservoir of planted material. And whenever I travel, I try to drive through all the small towns, the little cities, and see what they've planted there and what's doing well. Are they performing better than some of the cultivars that are out there? Could they do well in our area? And we'll propagate a number of those plants and try them in our area. And this is kind of similar to what Michael Durr has done in his tree selection. And he has you can look up a little article by Durr just called Selection by Serendipity. It's basically driving around and looking for trees. And that's really a way a lot of the new cultivars are brought into the nursery industry. We like to think it's real technical and we're breeding and we're splicing genes and all that. But basically we're out there driving around looking for new plants. There's a lot of seed source and seed lot variation. Redbud, which really isn't thought of a tree for the north here. There's quite a lot of variation in hardiness. Swamp white oak in the lower picture. You can see the one individual tree from the same seed lot, how it has performed compared to other trees from that seed lot. So there's a lot of variation that we can capture in seed lots. We do long-term observation of selected seedlings. This is one that I had started way back in about the year 2000, Northwest Minnesota sugar maple seed source. The further you can get with sugar maple to the west and to a degree to the north, the better adapted it is to prairie and plains conditions. So by about 2002 in a container, this tree was red before any of the other plants. And as it moved along, you can see every year on just about the same date, this sugar maple shutting down a full 2 to 3 weeks before other sugar maples in the area and others that we have tried. So, and it was actually released from the program in 2015 as September Flair. You can just set your calendar to it on the day that it will be turning. We do seed lot observation, just as an example. This is one that I'm probably not going to continue with, but these are Freeman maple seedlings, about 4,000 of them, planted out, grown for 2 years in a nursery, go through and select maybe 15, 20 out of those that may have superior traits. We grow those out, observe them for another 10, 12 years, excuse me, and just see if there's anything that we really want to retain out of those seed lots. We do some traditional breeding, as I mentioned. Dr. West is interested in magnolia breeding. We work with we were working with a breeder in Green Bay. He has since passed away, but trying to combine hardiness with flower color in moving some of the magnolia cultivars into zone 4B and 4A. And then, as I mentioned, I do a lot of selection by landscape observation. And it's just basically looking at trees that are already established out there and have been through many, many years of -30s, -35s, excuse me, crappy soils. We're looking for form, foliar characteristics, something that's going to be useful in the long run. And as I mentioned, those are propagated and trialed and see how they perform in the future. As an example, I grew up in Kansas and southeast Nebraska. Redbuds were everywhere. My father always had a redbud out in the yard. Moving to North Dakota, you know, they were non-existent. So generally thought of as a zone 5 plant, 4B in some sheltered locations. But over the past 30 years now, in South Dakota, Minnesota, I found a number of trees in zone 4A in a number of places. And they have, I try to look for plants 25 to 30 years old or much older, and they have endured lows of -30 multiple times. So it's kind of what I look for in those. So these are some of the examples. A few of these are in South Dakota. Excuse me. This is my wife standing beside one in South Dakota. I call her my standard-sized wife as a standard of comparison. So she gets into all my pictures. She doesn't like to be included in them, but I say, well, you're 5'6". We know how tall you are, so you'll be the standard of comparison on all of these. So, but there's a lot of materials out there, and we've propagated these and trialed a number of them. We also do some seed lot growing out of these also. And there's a lot of differences in seed lots of a number of these. You can see on the left the much larger, robust seedlings in the background compared to another source which has died back considerably in the foreground. And our past graduate student, Catherine, was very interested in redbuds and was always wanting to accompany me on these little excursions to go out and collect. So when we do get one that we like, we trial it, trialed by nurseries. They'll propagate it, see how it grows compared to other cultivars, how it holds up in their production regime. And one of our first ones released is Northern Herald Redbud. It's being propagated by J. Frank Schmidt Nursery, Hidden Hollow Nursery in Tennessee. It's got a zone 4B hardiness, which is a step improvement at least over a lot of the other redbuds. But what we really like about it, it's got a very, very heavy leaf texture. And it helps to relieve or prevent some of that summer leaf desiccation that you get on redbuds a lot. So it's a very, very heavy, heavy leathery leaf on it. And that's available now from Schmidt Nursery in Oregon. A species which had not been utilized previously in production is Ulmus hirsuta, or Manchurian alder. I've got a bug in my throat here. It's increasingly being used, especially in northern cities here, the northern tier of states, as a boulevard tree. It's a prairie horizon Manchurian alder. It's got very large, bold leaves, very attractive foliage on it, a nice yellow in the fall. It's not a massive tree, 35 by 25 foot. Just doing very well. It'd be interesting to see how it does in your area if you haven't tried it yet. We have noticed susceptibility to sapsuckers on the smooth bark trees, much the way they like birch and some of the elms, so that can be a problem with it. But overall, it's been a very good tree so far. And it's generally available in the nursery trade. Bailey's is a big producer of it. Winter form is attractive. These are two trees in entirely different areas, and they look very similar in the winter. You can see the catkins and the small cones on it, the seed cones, female cones on it. It's got very smooth bark on it, almost like a birch. Very smooth gray bark. Prairie Dream paper birch is a paper birch from western North Dakota, an area called the Killdeer Mountains. Our mountains are definitely not what you would consider mountains, but they are a rise. They're a remnant area, high pH, dry area. Birches occur in some of those canyons, and Dr. Herman grew a seedling population out, selected this tree as Prairie Dream paper birch. Very, very white, very white bark on it, as opposed to a number of other paper birches, but very, very white bark on it. It's had high bronze birch borer resistance, but I have noticed the original tree, a branch on it is now starting to look like it may have it. But, you know, after 40, 45 years, you can expect that in a birch planted in an off-birch site. So it's generally have held up very well. This whole population has held up very well. River birch is not used in our area at all until the release of Northern Tribute River birch out of the program. This was selected in Dickinson, North Dakota, western part of North Dakota. It's got about a 13-inch precip, high pH environment. It was in town, but doing very well, not showing signs of chlorosis. So it was propagated, tested, is, excuse me, now in production as Northern Tribute River birch. It's got an attractive bark on it, very exfoliating, very peeling bark, nice glossy green foliage. So, and it is available now from West Coast producers. I believe Schmidt's, Bailey's, Heritage Seedlings all have it. Dakota Pinnacle, very upright Asian white birch, very unique in its form, pretty well available nationwide now. Retains this form naturally. Very nice foliage on it. Initially, it didn't show any bronze birch borer problems, but again, as more of these are planted off-site with the typical problems that plague birch borer is showing up in it. But if you can plant it in an ideal position, I think it'll do well. It's a very unique form to it. A new release, pretty limited production, is called Cinnamon Curls Korean Birch. And this is a very dwarf birch for a very small planting area, 9 by 9 at 30 years. So typically it's not going to be grown by the shade tree nursery industry. It's going to be grown by the specialty nurseries. Isley Nursery now has it in production. So hopefully it'll be available in a while here. But very exfoliating bark, very nice rounded form to it. No maintenance on it at all. Emerald Flair is one we've just released and being trialed and built up in the nursery industries. Hopefully be available in a couple of years. Very upright in form, once again, shows very good dry soil tolerance. So we're hoping that that will be a plus in bronze birch borer resistance with it. I want to talk a little bit about Buckeyes. Buckeyes are being used more and more in our area. Autumn Splendor is kind of the go-to type cultivar. Also, Homestead is used quite a bit. And what we're doing is looking for other forms. There is another cultivar out of our program called Prairie Torch that is sometimes available. Brilliant orange, red in the fall, but the growth is horizontal, which made it more difficult to produce in the nursery industry. So if they can't grow them, bundle them, get them sent out without breakage, then that's a problem to it. We're looking at several other forms, an upright form, very dense upright oval form, one that I've been watching since about 2005. It was released as Lava Burst Ohio Buckeye. It's very compact, very small. It's going to be ideal for smaller landscapes, for boulevard plantings. Height of 25 to 28 foot, spread about 14 to 18 foot. We now have about 3 or 4 nurseries in initial propagation of this. So hopefully not too far down the road, this will be available. Really ideal and constrained form for a Buckeye. Another Buckeye that I really like, it's seedling propagated. I don't know if you've tried it in your area or not. It's another Aesculus glabra, but it's Aesculus glabra arguta. It's a very, very small Buckeye, 20 to 30 feet in height, 20, 25 foot in width. Zone 3 hardiness. Don't let the Texas name fool you. Just the foliage on it is very heavy, adapted to higher temperatures and lower precipitation. This is native in the Texas Hill Country. I think it may go out on the Edwards Plateau. So it's very adapted to hot, dry conditions, and it can be found in the nursery trade, but you got to look for it. But they're seedling grown. It's a neat little Buckeye to include in the landscape. Honey locust was barely even used in our area when I moved up here in '82. The traditional cultivars, Skyline, Shademaster, and those suffer a lot of winter damage in our area, which causes nectaria canker on them. Dr. Herman had grown out populations of northern honey locusts that were doing well in an effort to find a male thornless one, and he did. That's done very well. It's Northern Acclaim. This tree is thornless, it is a male. It's pushed the usage of honey locust into southern Manitoba and Saskatchewan now even. So it's pretty widely planted within the whole northern plains. In fact, it's probably being overplanted in our area as a cultivar, but we just don't have a lot of other cultivars available right now. But the hardiest honey locust cultivar that you can attain. Another little legume that I really like is Machia. If you're familiar with Machia, it's an Asian small small legume, summer flowering tree, very attractive bark. It's probably got the worst name for a tree in the trade. Machia, I mean, what is that? That would give you no idea what it is at all. But it's a neat little tree, very silvery foliage when it comes out in the spring. It blooms in our area late July to early August. So there's no other trees in bloom at that time. And the bees and butterflies, especially native bumblebees, just come in by the hundreds and hundreds on these trees, which if you're into native bees, which a lot of people are, that's a good thing. I guess if you're afraid of bees, maybe it's a bad thing. But it's a very nice little tree. And there are some cultivars in the trade right now, Magnificent Starburst, Summertime. There's another one recently being added called Summer Frost. So it's a neat tree to get out and try. It's more of a specimen tree in a landscape, but it's done very well in northern areas. How it will do in a higher heat, lower precip area, we'll have to see how it does in your area. Prairie gem flowering pear has been around for a long time out of the program. A very dense, round-headed tree, small tree, used a lot as boulevard plantings, school plantings, golf course edges, 25 by 25, very, very small, round-headed pear, Usurian pear. So it's very hardy, zone 3 tree, does very well. We tend to use some of these things more in the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, and I'm not sure if you've used it in your area or not, but it is available and it has a very unique form to it. American elm has kind of had a resurgence. Prairie Expedition was released out of our program. We may have now, what, 5, 6 DED resistant cultivars, though Princeton elm is now starting to be known to be susceptible to DED under certain conditions. So we have to watch how many we plant. Prairie Expedition has not showed up at all with any Dutch elm problems. Prairie Expedition elm was found just south of Fargo here along the Wild Rice River. This was a corridor that was all forested with American elm at one time. And you can see it is the surviving tree in the region. This is the only American elm left in that area. Dr. Herman propagated it, had it subjected to inoculations of the 2 prevalent Dutch elm disease species that are in the United States. It's able to wall that off and keep growing and not lose limbs to it. So it's done very well. The form kind of gives you an idea of a big mushroom, unfortunately, but this is a double-trunked tree and kind of gave it a wider appearance. And I always tell people this tree is now dead, and it's always a big gasp from the audience, but it's not from Dutch elm disease. It's because the beavers along the river surfaced and saw one tree left that they could girdle, and they did that to it, and that killed it. So before the landowner caught it. But this is Prairie Expedition in a boulevard planting in Fargo in heavy. We have some of the worst clay in the country here. Heavy clay. There's hackberry on each side of it. Prairie Expedition in the middle. And again, it's loving it. Elms seem to love these conditions. So the biggest thing with elms is their rapid growth, which causes breakage. So any way you can slow them down, it's great. Japanese elm, more widely used now in our area. I'm not sure if it is in your area, but one of the harder wooded elms, very DED resistant. It's a smaller tree. The clone that is generally available is Discovery, but some of the hybrids with Japanese elm, like New Horizon, are very popular now too. So we have released Japanese elm out of our program. It's a small tree, 25 to 28 foot, maybe 25 to 30 foot in height, very high quality summer foliage, very adaptable, and very, very minimal seed production. In fact, most years it has no seed at all on it. We were trying to do crosses with it, and it's just hard to find viable female flowers on it, which is a good thing. So it's a very nice small tree, nice smaller boulevard tree, landscape tree. The unique thing is it doesn't turn yellow in the fall. It turns this kind of apricot into a reddish orangey color, And in a long fall, it will actually be kind of a burgundy color to it. So very attractive fall color on it. Initially available from Bailey's in Minnesota, available for 2021, but not sure how their numbers are going to be on it. A lot of nurseries kind of slide in gradually to some of these new releases, so it will pick up in the future though. If you want a lot of information on elms that do well in zones 3 to 5, we do have a publication out of our extension. Came out last year, just elms for North Dakota, but it's applicable to the whole central region of the U.S. So if you want further information on a lot of cultivars and how well they have done, that's one you can look up. Oaks, of course, everybody's favorite tree is the oak. Well, maybe not everybody's, but certainly one of mine. And Prairie Stature oak is released out of our program. It's a natural cross between Quercus robur, the English, and Quercus alba, the white oak. And it's done surprisingly very well in our area, probably because of the Quercus robur or English oak influence, which tolerates very high soil pHs. Got very nice foliage, green color in the summer. Winter or fall color is an orange red. It calipers up very quickly in a landscape. I'm amazed when I look at these newly planted trees how quickly they caliper up for people. Northern Plains bur oak, of course, one of my favorites. We have populations along all of our riparian areas, so they're up in well up in the zone 3 hardiness range, and across the whole region anywhere from 14 to 24 inch precip zone. So very adapted to our region. I call it Northern Plains bur oak. It is totally unlike oaks out of Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri, further east. It's smaller foliage size, smaller acorn size. Overall tree size is actually smaller too. Very high soil pH tolerant. They grow on, I've seen them growing on soil pHs up above 8.5 and doing very well. So very tolerant of just tough soil conditions. This one is just below an apartment I have here in Fargo, so I can set out on my deck and see it through the seasons changing. There's a few cultivars out on bur oak. I'm not impressed with any of them at this point. Hopefully some future ones, but Top Gun is from Violins in Canada. Urban Pinnacle actually is a nice tree, an upright Northern Plains bur oak selection for upright growth. Cobblestone is a rough bark. Bulletproof out of Plant Select. Scott Skogerbo, Tim Buchanan, I think both had a hand in this, and Ross, you probably had a hand in it too at some point. So hopefully that's doing well. We have one plant we put out, so we would like more, but we have one plant. We'll give it a try here. This is just a few of them. Top Gun on the left. Really, we've had trouble with that here. Urban Pinnacle on the right is out of a Northern Plains seed lot, so it's very adaptable and grafted onto Northern Plains bur oak rootstock. So one of my big interests is how can we increase adaptability and availability of oak cultivars and species? Because a lot of them, due to our high pH, do not live here. So rootstock selection within the white oak group goes a long ways. Within the red oak group, we just don't have rootstocks that now are long lasting and will show compatibility in the long run. So that's a tough one right now. Selection and trial of potential seed sources. That probably offers the greatest potential for growers in our areas. We get further west and further north to a degree. Some of these swamp white oak and even white oak show better tolerance to higher soil pH, not total, but better tolerance. Then hybridization, there's a lot of hybridization, both natural and engaged in by breeders such as myself, and then encourage regional nurseries to propagate oaks within those methods. If we use those regional seed sources, regional rootstocks, we can go a long ways in increasing our oak availability. This is swamp white oak. I see it in here, it's in North Dakota. The talk was originally for North Dakota, but you can go to Montana, you can go to Colorado, you can go to Western Nebraska, South Dakota, Western Minnesota. Swamp white oaks all look like this. Not all, but a lot of them do. The one on the right is actually a good example of swamp white in our area. Typically, the ones on the left, the ones on the right are much more typical of what we have. Chlorotic growth, gradually just decline and die. They are not long-term trees for us because of the high soil pH, which is a real problem for us. What happens is when you graft these onto Northern Plains bur oak, this is white oak, the two pictures, center and on the left, and then upper right is white oak on its own root. Lower right is swamp white oak on Northern Plains bur. So these trees, just it's day and night difference. They become deep green, they have luxuriant foliage, they have tremendous growth on them. So it creates a very adaptable tree. These pictures are several years ago. The white oaks and swamp white oaks now are probably anywhere from about 7 to 9 feet tall. Just very, very good growth. If you've heard of Regal Prince hybrid oak, that's got bicolor in the background. On the left, this is what Regal Prince looked like after 5 years. On the right, and that tree on the left was planted about 4 or 5 years ago. On the right is Regal Prince on bur oak, planted just a couple of years ago, about 20 foot away from this one on the left. And you can see the difference in the foliage. It's just night and day. The foliage may look a little lighter on the top of the one on the right, but that's because the sun is coming through it. The center picture shows that foliage on that Regal Prince on bur oak. So we have a hybrid that was unusable before, which would be totally hybrid now if it was on a correct rootstock. So rather than bicolor, it needs to be put onto Northern Plains bur oak rootstock. I do want to give, I've put a slide in here from Mark Krautman's work with Southwestern oaks. And he works with Alan Taylor out of Boulder. Alan has made a number of selections of Southwestern oaks, and Heritage Seedlings offers a lot of those oaks grafted, which probably a number of those may have usage in your area as smaller oaks. They are smaller statured oaks, but you know, check Mark's availability and descriptions. A lot of very interesting oaks that he and Alan Taylor have brought to availability. I'm just going to go through some other trees here, and I probably better speed myself up a little, but Australia, another one of my favorite little trees. Again, Eastern Australia is not Western Australia, and I'm saying Western on the Western Plains. Eastern Australia tends to struggle here. You get into the Western Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota sources, and it's also native in the Black Hills of South Dakota and Wyoming. So we have a really good seed source of ironwood that we could be utilizing if we have a grower that would take it to that next level, because those sources are definitely much more adapted to our area, heavier leaf, much more pubescence on the leaf, and much more adapted to our drier conditions. There is a tree that has been doing very well. We trial a lot of materials for J. Frank Schmidt Nursery. They have Autumn Treasure Hophorn Beam, or Australia, much more upright in growth. We've had it down through 37 below now and no damage on it. So we feel it's got some hardiness to it. And if that can hold up in the long run, then we'll be able to recommend that for our area. But it's one you may want to try in your area, much more upright growth and good cold hardiness to it. This is one that I rarely find available, and I throw it in every now and then just because I like it, but American smoke tree. You know, it comes from some small areas in the east, southeast U.S., but it's got zone 4 hardiness for us. It does not die back in our -30s at all. Got large blue-gray leaves, very tolerant of high soil pH. The fall color on them is just tremendous, orange fall color. So it's just one, maybe if you come across it, consider trying it in some areas, because it's a unique tree. It's a native U.S. tree that's just very underutilized. Catalpas are kind of making a comeback. Again, growing up in Kansas, Nebraska, the big, giant, spreading catalpas were pretty common. Once I got north, they were kind of a unique collector's tree up here, but now becoming much more noticeable. We're looking at a couple different sources. J. Frank Schmidt Nursery on the right has come out with Heartland Catalpa, and it's just doing amazingly well here. Again, that winter of 37 below, -37, bookend by a lot of -20s and -30s. It was hardy to the tips on it, on heartland. So it may be a nice addition to our area. I mentioned cork tree earlier and its tolerance to high pH soils. There's a number of cultivars, Ice Stoppers, Majesty, Macho. Cork trees are very unique. They're very tolerant of higher soil pH conditions. The big thing is plant male cultivars only. Female plants, the seed is loved by birds and they will proliferate. So male cultivars only on those. Couple lindens that you may not come across as much in your area, but that have come out of Canadian growers. Harvest Gold Mongolian linden. It's a smaller linden, 35, 40 foot height, 25, 30 foot in width. Used on boulevards much more here. Kind of an exfoliating bark, very heavy, dark green leaf, very tolerant, high soil pH conditions. It's becoming one of the go-to trees in our urban areas here. Another one then is Golden Cascade, which is another little leaf linden. Beautiful tree, kind of pendulous branches on it. Unfortunately, this one was planted on a boulevard. Do not plant it on a boulevard. Cities like trees limbed up well above the height of garbage trees or garbage trucks, and they become garbage trees. Unfortunately, this tree is very high limbed now, has lost all effect of that pendulous weeping nature to it, but a really neat tree if you get it up in a yard or on the ground somewhere. Very unique. In an office complex where you need something unique, nice tree. Everybody's familiar with a lot of the tree lilacs, I think, but and we have a tree lilac cultivar out of our program, but we also have a Peking tree lilac cultivar. The Peking lilacs are not as well known as the Japanese tree lilacs, but there's some really neat trees. Copper Curls is one out of our program on the right, just very exfoliating coppery bark. Really, for areas with a longer winter like ours, it adds a lot of winter interest. So there's some others available. Beijing Gold has they're not gold flowers, they're a kind of a lighter, very light yellow gold to them. But Summer Charm, China Snow has exfoliating bark also. So there's a number of different Pekin lilacs out there too. Real quickly, we had Northern Spotlight in production by a couple nurseries. It's a Korean maple, a palmate maple, very closely related Japanese maple. Now, Isley was growing it. I think they've dropped it to put more emphasis on their less hardy Korean maple hybrids, which do not grow in our area. So, but this is a very winter hardy selection. It's gone down through -40 several times, but until it gets available, I can't push it a lot, but it is a very interesting plant. Everybody in our area likes sugar maples, and that's great. The biggest thing, as I mentioned earlier about sugar maples, you've got to go to the west end of their range and to the northwest edge of their range. And then trees do very well in our area. They do much, much better than red and Freeman maples. Sugar maple will be green on those sites where Freemans are yellow. Bailey Nursery introduced Fall Fiesta a while back with heavier leathery leaves. Does very well in our area. Dr. Herman, when he was here back in the 70s and 80s, when he first started looking at some of these, went to the northwesternmost range of sugar maple, which is in the Sisseton Hills in northeast South Dakota. There's a glacial remnant area, a hilly area with sugar maples in those ravines, and he grew a number of plants out of the population there. A lot of them didn't live up to his standards at all. He retained a number of them, and out of that population, he released Northern Flair sugar maple. So again, very heavy leathery leaves, very cold tolerant, adaptable to high soil pHs if grafted on the right rootstock. And I'll mention rootstocks in reference with another maple here in just a little bit. September Flair, I mentioned earlier, turns this brilliant red by the third week of September every year. Under trial by several nurseries. Hopefully it will move along, but zone 3B hardiness. You can see September 20th, My neighbors in Bismarck allowed me to plant their boulevard with sugar maple selection. So, and I wanted to compare to this, my red September Flair. So you can see the difference in it. It shuts down very, very early, and they get a free tree out of the deal. So they were happy. So, Jeffrey's Nursery in Canada, once the border opens up again, we can get trees here again, but they have Unity sugar maple and several other newer selections now. Extremely cold hardy, zone 3, A on some of them, 3B generally, tolerant to high soil pHs. So very, very good, good trees for our region. If you're looking for a smaller sugar maple, which has really done well for us, at least at our hort farm and in several other areas, this is a small sugar maple, very dense, one of those dense formed trees, only 25 to 30 foot tall, 12 foot wide, brilliant orange red in the fall. These pictures, if taken or if looked at a week later, the tree would just be brilliant orange. But a sugar maple for a small area is very unique. That's why I like it. It's so different from the large, typical form sugar maples. Then we've been trying several from Cato County, Oklahoma, several of the cultivars. Sugar maple, which was thought to be another subspecies, occurs out in central Oklahoma, in the I don't call them canyons. I call them draws. They call them canyons. But it occurs in those areas. Central Oklahoma, very warm, very hot, dry, prairie winds, tough soils. These surprisingly have been hardy for us here. Start shutting down in late September, earlier than the other sugar maples in our area. Just it's a little slower growing than the other sugar maples, but they have not been injured by -30. So it's kind of an interesting subspecies of sugar maple from way to the south in the plains that does at least acceptably well in the northern plains. And we have these at our hort farm where there is no temperature moderation by urban environment or buildings or anything. So they probably are several degrees colder than what we're calling -35, -37. I'm going to mention canyon maple, and then in a wider range, rootstocks. There's canyon maples, Acer grandidentatum. I've collected clear up through Wyoming. Zone 3B hardiness, do very well on their own roots if they're seedling grown. You put them on sugar maple rootstock, and they tend to really suffer chlorotic. They're not thrifty, and many of them will fail on that, what is typically an eastern sugar maple rootstock. Most of the rootstocks for production nurseries come from, the seed for it comes from Pennsylvania, which is not adapted to our area at all. So my project coming up here as I retire is to start collecting these northern sugar maple ranges in western Minnesota, northwest Iowa, western Iowa, back to Sika Hollow in South Dakota, and see what species like canyon maple and some of the sugar maple cultivars will do on those rootstocks compared to the typical eastern sugar maple rootstock. So if you're utilizing Acer grandidentatum, hopefully you're using regional seed sources on it. It's got a wide range. It goes from New Mexico way up into Wyoming, and I can tell you we've trialed the New Mexico source in our Arboretum, and they died the first winter when they hit -25. So whereas these from southwest Wyoming, -35, they breeze through it. So there's a lot of variation in these native species, and hopefully your native plant growers are utilizing that in your area. A few other maples, State Street, we really like it here. It's done very well. Nice clear yellow fall color for us. So it's one that we'll try, kind of recommend on a limited basis. Very nice, widely available. If you're not familiar with three-flower maple, it's a close cousin to paperbark maple. Paperbark maple is a zone 5 plant, does not grow here at all. Three-flower maple has endured zone 3B temperatures easily. I've had it go through -40 several times in Bismarck. No damage at all. Brilliant fall coloration. What I really like on three-flower maple, The bark is very birch-like. I think it's actually more attractive than paper bark maple. It reminds me more of a river birch in a way. A few conifers, and I'll finish up here. We plant spruce, Colorado spruce, by the millions in our state in conservation programs, in landscapes. And anytime you plant millions of anything, you start catching up on diseases. So needle cast, we've got 2 needle cast diseases. We've got cytospora on the trunks of them. But people, I mean, they have to have their spruce. That's just a requirement for living in the Dakotas, I think. But we don't recommend them, but people are using them. We have a release, Royal Splendor Norway spruce. We call it Norway. We think it's actually a hybrid between 2 species, northern Finland, Russia area. Zone 2B hardiness, very, very pyramidal, dense pyramidal in form. It's not typical of the species. Most of the Norways get those drooping old age branches on them that really get ugly. This remains a tight, upright form, medium to fast growth. It's available. Isley Nursery, Oregon Pride, Chester Farms. It's a nice, nice plant. We really like it. Here's a young one. You can see the growth on it. Very, very rapid. Short needles on it. Just a nice tree. The big unfortunate problem, it's green. Everybody's in their thinking blue is synonymous with spruce. So it's hard to overcome. One of the things I am looking at is Meyer spruce. It's an Asian spruce. It has so far in our area been resistant to the needle cast diseases. It does not seem to be as drought tolerant, but it does not come down with the needle cast diseases. So looking at that, I found a few kind of blue ones. We'll see how they do. They're being grafted by a production nursery now to see what they do. Trying to find a form that's similar to Colorado spruce. Meyer spruce is all over the planet in form. It can be just white and fat to much more upright, and it's totally unpredictable from seed in form. But if we could get some cultivars that can be propagated so we know what we're going to get, I think there's a place for it in the future. Pinacembra, if you're not familiar with Pinacembra, it's a white pine from the higher areas of Europe, the Alps in Europe, extremely hardy, zone 3. Just a beautiful, beautiful tree. And let me see if I've got, I'll go back to that foliage on there. This is Prairie Statesman. It's bigger than the other Swiss pine selections. It'll get 45 foot tall. What we have noticed about the Pinacembras, and we've had several winters of intense winter needle burn on a lot of conifers, including Colorado's, ponderosa pine, everything. All cultivars, every cultivar we have a Pinacembra was virtually clean of any winter burn. We could not find a winter burn needle on them. So if you have areas of very high light intensity in the wintertime, prone to winter needle burn, it's really one for you to try. These are taken over a couple year period, some young ones on the left, and about 5 years later, again, my standard of comparison wife standing beside it there. So they grow fairly rapidly when they're established. And beautiful tree, very soft, very, very soft needles. So neat tree. Rocky Mountain Douglas fir, of course, common in your area, really not hardy in our area, surprisingly, except for some certain sources. And we have a source that we're utilizing as seedlings now that are planted in a cemetery that were originally planted as Colorado spruce from a nursery in Colorado, unfortunately, back in '49. So if any of you remember doing that, but within that population, it's been very hardy. We have a selection out of there that's very upright, very, very dense, bright green foliage form. It's called a Green Canyon Douglas fir, and that is in production with Oregon Pride Nurseries. Hopefully will be available here in the next few years. So there we go. On the inverse side of conifers, this is Blueberry Delight, common juniper, communis juniper, native throughout the whole very north temperate area and down through the Rocky Mountains. This is one called Blueberry Delight. Is meant to be grown with another one called Copper Delight, which is the male. Blueberry Delight's the female. But most nurseries just produce the female clone and not the male, so we're not getting the blue fruit on it. But the plant is very, very attractive. It's got a very green needles, and they're very silvery underneath. So very attractive, small, native communis juniper. Does very well. Looks neat in winter plantings. Just throwing Dakota sunspot potentilla out there, still the most popular potentilla up in our area. Very floriferous, one out of our program, does very well. So with that, you can contact myself or Dr. Todd West at the program here for any questions you may have. Our cultivars are released and described on the Woody Plant website, which is with the Research Foundation. So if you just Google NDS Woody Plant Improvement Program releases, you'll get descriptions of all of our cultivars within that. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us.